Alrighty, sorry about the delay. That wasn't too bad as far as frag delays go. Welcome back to Free Read Fridays. Oh, thanks for tuning in, Apollo Smith and a human person. My favorite kind of person. Well, actually, I'll take anybody who can attain personhood. They don't have to be human. No worries, no worries, a human person. Um, and a optical antenna. Golly gee willikers, we've got the bodies today. Crazy. Okay, so it's in the title, acceptance. We're finally getting there. I was today years old when I learned that there's in fact going to be a fourth book called Absolution. Who knows what that entails or will entail? All I've seen is like a 1.5 paragraph snippet that he posted somewhere that he said, no, 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 there's absolutely going to be a fourth book. And it's like, up, something, 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 people in field tents, something, something. And I'm like, oh, let's go. So he's been working on that since at least 2020. So who knows when that'll be out? In fact, I think hasn't Peter Watts been working on the third Blindopraxia novel for years now? Couple years now. When did Echopraxia come out? Was that like 2018? Anyway, I'm pretty excited. Like, I wish I'd known that 3 years ago, but on the other hand, I'm also glad I didn't know that 3 years ago because it'd be like drumming my fingers nonstop, waiting for the next one to come out. And this way, it'll be a shorter wait of drumming my fingers, waiting for the next one to come out. I do want to read some more Jeff VanderMeer on stream. It probably won't, after this book, it probably won't be this year because I've got a lot of stuff queued up that are some on request, some not. Mostly some on request. I had a logical stopping point. I have to find where it is and put a marker in it. Acceptance is kind of beefy. So this is probably going to wind up being more installments than the... How many pages in is that? Than the previous two. Because the acceptance chunk of the collected hardcover that I have is almost as long as both of the first two put together. Almost, not quite. It's like 30% less, maybe 25% less. That's like 40 pages. We'll mark there and see how we're doing. So, a warning, I do not consider it spoilers. A warning ahead of time. This is going to switch character perspectives practically every chapter. And it's actually more than 3 character perspectives. It's more like 4.5. It's fine. They're all labeled accordingly. You'll keep up. Some of them are new characters. Some of them are not new characters. Some of them are sort of new characters. You will understand when we get there. It will all be made clear and present. All right. So that's it for ado. That didn't make any sense, Frank. It's fine. I apologize. I've been actually begrudgingly re-listening to some of my streams, and I sound like I'm stuffed all the time, like in the head. I swear I'm not. It's just this kind of it's a headset microphone, so I sound kind of like blah, 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 like I have my nose closed all the time. It's kind of embarrassing. I don't have a professional mic. Maybe people have figured that one out. Maybe you haven't. If so, if not, well, you know now. I may look into that in the future. Though some days I am stuffy, so it's fine. Okay, so without additional ado, we will get cracking. When does that part seem to end at all? Don't lose your page again. Okay, there we go. Okay. I turned off the intro video. Yes, I did. Excellent. I turned off the intro video. One last quick aside. I've got a bunch of nice book covers and some fan art as well queued up for later streams, so that'll be fun. There's some great cover art for this one. Acceptance by Jeff VanderMeer. 000X, the Director, 12th Expedition. Just out of reach, just beyond you, the rush and froth of the surf, the sharp smell of the sea, the crisscrossing shape of the gulls, their sudden, jarring cries. An ordinary day in Area X, an extraordinary day, the day of your death. And there you are, propped up against a mound of sand, half sheltered by a crumbling wall. The warm sun against your face, and the dizzying view above the lighthouse looming down through its own shadow. The sky has an intensity that admits to nothing beyond its blue prison. There's sticky sand glittering across a gash in your forehead. There's a tangy glottal something in your mouth dripping out. You feel numb and you feel broken, but there's a strange relief mixed in with the regret. To come such a long way, to come to a halt here, without knowing how it will turn out, and yet to rest. To come to rest. Finally. All of your plans back at the southern reach, the agonizing and constant fear of failure or worse, the price of that, all of it leaking out into the sand beside you in gritty red pearls. The landscape surges toward you, curling over from behind to peer at you. It flares in places, or swirls, or reduces itself to a pinprick before coming back into focus. Your hearing isn't what it once was either, has weakened along with your balance. And yet there comes this impossible thing, a magician's trick of a voice rising out of the landscape and the suggestion of eyes upon you. The whisper is familiar. Is your house in order? But you think whoever is asking might be a stranger, and you ignore it, don't like what might be knocking at the door. The throbbing of your shoulder from the encounter in the tower is much worse. The wound betrayed you, made you leap out into that blazing blue expanse even though you hadn't wanted to. Some communication, some trigger between the wound and the flame that came dancing across the reeds betrayed your sovereignty. Your house has rarely been in such disarray, and yet you know that no matter what. What? Okay, that's a weird run-on sentence. Oh, I'm blind and don't know how to read, sorry. Your house has rarely been in such disarray, and yet you know that no matter what leaves you in a few minutes, something else will remain behind. Disappearing into the sky, the earth, the water, is no guarantee of death here. A shadow joins the shadow of the lighthouse. Soon after, there comes the crunch of boots, and, disoriented, you shout, "Annihilation! Annihilation!" and flail about until you realize the apparition kneeling before you is the one person impervious to the suggestion. It's just me, the biologist. Just you. Just the biologist. Just your defiant weapon hurled against the walls of Area X. She props you up, presses water to your mouth, clearing some of the blood as you cough. "Where is the surveyor?" you ask. "Back at the base camp," she tells you. "Wouldn't come with you?" Afraid of the biologist, afraid of the burgeoning flame, just like you. Just like you? Not sure the emphasis on that one. A slow burning flame, a will-o'-the-wisp, floating across the marsh and the dunes, floating and floating, like nothing human but something free and floating. A hypnotic suggestion meant to calm her, even if it will have no more effect than a comforting nursery rhyme. As the conversation unspools, you keep faltering and losing track of it. You say things you don't mean, trying to stay in character. The person the biologist knows you as, the construct you created for her. Maybe you shouldn't care about roles now, but there's still a role to play. She's blaming you, but you can't blame her. If it was a disaster, you helped create it. You just panicked and you gave up. Not true. You never gave up. But you nod anyway, thinking of so many mistakes. I did. I did. I should have recognized earlier that you had changed. True. I should have sent you back to the border. Not true. I shouldn't have gone down there with the anthropologist. Not true. Not really. You had no choice once she slipped away from base camp, intent on proving herself. You're coughing up more blood, but it hardly matters now. What does the border look like? A child's question. A question whose answer means nothing. There is nothing but border. There is no border. I'll tell you when I get there. What really happens when we cross over? Not what you might expect. What did you hide from us about Area X? Nothing that would have helped you. Not really. The sun is a weak halo with no center, and the biologist's voice threads in and out, the sand both cold and hot in your clenched right hand. The pain that keeps returning in bursts is attacking every couple of microseconds, so present that it isn't even there anymore. Eventually, you recognize that you have lost the ability to speak. But you are still there, muffled and distant, as if you're a kid lying on a blanket on this very beach with a hat over your eyes, lulled into drowsiness by the constant surging sound of the water and the sea breezes, balancing the heat that ripples over you, spreads through your limbs. The wind against your hair is a sensation as remote as the ruffling of weeds sprouting from a head-shaped rock. I'm sorry, but I have to do this, the biologist tells you, almost as if she knows you can still hear her. I have no choice. You feel the tug and pull on your skin, the brief, incisive line, as the biologist takes a sample from your infected shoulder. From a great and insurmountable distance, searching hands descend as the biologist goes through your jacket pockets. She finds your journal. She finds your hidden gun. She finds your pathetic letter. What will she make of them? Maybe nothing at all. Maybe she'll just throw the letter into the sea, and the gun with it. Maybe she'll waste the rest of her life studying your journal. She's still talking. I don't know what to say to you. I'm angry. I'm frightened. You put us here, and you had a chance to tell me what you knew, and you didn't. You wouldn't. I'd say rest in peace, but I don't think you will. Then she's gone, and you miss her, that weight of a human being beside you, the perverse blessing of those words. But you don't miss her for long, because you are fading further still, fading into the landscape like a reluctant wraith, and you can hear a faint and delicate music in the distance, and something that whispered to you before is whispering again, and then you're dissolving into the wind. A kind of alien regard has twinned itself to you, easily mistaken for the atoms of the air if it did not seem somehow concentrated, purposeful, joyful? Taken up over the still lakes, rising up across the marsh, flickering up in green glinting reflections against the sea and the shore and in the late afternoon sun, only to wheel and bank toward the interior and its cypress trees, its black water. Then sharply up into the sky again, taking aim for the sun, the lurch and spin of it, before free fall, twisting to stare down at the onrushing earth, stretched taut above the quick flash and slow wave of reeds. You half expect to see Lowry there, a wounded survivor of the long-ago first expedition, crawling toward the safety of the border. But instead there is just the biologist trudging back down the darkening path. And waiting beyond her, mewling and in distress, the altered psychologist from the expedition before the 12th. Your fault as much as anyone's. Your fault, and irrevocable. Unforgivable. As you curve back around, the lighthouse fast approaches. The air trembles as it pushes out from both sides of the lighthouse, and then reforms, ever questing, forever sampling, rising high only to come low yet again, and finally circling like a question mark so you can bear witness to your own immolation. A shape huddled there, leaking light. What a sad figure, sleeping there, dissolving there. A green flame, a distress signal, an opportunity. Are you still soaring? Are you still dying or dead? You can't tell anymore. But the whisper isn't done with you yet. You're not down there. You're up here. And there's still an interrogation going on. One that will repeat until you have given up every answer. Part 1. Range Light. 0001. The Lighthouse Keeper. Overhauled the lens machinery and cleaned the lens. Fixed the water pipe in the garden. Small repair to the gate. Organized the tools and shovels, etc. in the shed. S&SB visit. Need to requisition paint for Daymark. Black eroded on seaward side. Also need nails and to check the western siren again. Sighted. Pelicans. Moorhens. Some kind of warbler. Blackbirds beyond number, sanderlings, a royal tern, an osprey, flickers, cormorants, bluebirds, pygmy rattlesnake, at the fence, remember, a rabbit or two, white-tailed deer, and near dawn, on the trail, many an armadillo. That winter morning, the wind was cold against the collar of Saul Evans's coat as he trudged down the trail toward the lighthouse. There had been a storm the night before, and down and to his left the ocean lay gray and roiling against the dull blue of the sky, seen through the rustle and sway of the sea oats. Driftwood and bottles and faded white buoys and a dead hammerhead shark had washed up in the aftermath, tangled among snarls of seaweed, but no real damage either here or in the village. At his feet lay bramble and the thick gray of thistles that would bloom purple in the spring and summer. To his right, the ponds were dark with the muttering complaints of grebes and buffleheads. Blackbirds plunged the thin branches of trees down, exploded upward in panic at his passage, settled back into garrulous communities. The brisk, fresh salt smell to the air had an edge of flame, a burning smell from some nearby house or still smoldering bonfire. Saul had lived in the lighthouse for 4 years before he'd met Charlie, and he lived there still, but last night he'd stayed in the village, a half a mile away, in Charlie's cottage. A new thing, this, not agreed to with words, but with Charlie pulling him back to bed when he'd been about to put on his clothes and leave. A welcome thing that put an awkward half-smile on Saul's face. Charlie'd barely stirred as Saul had gotten up, dressed, made eggs for breakfast. He'd served Charlie a generous portion with a slice of orange, kept hot under a bowl, and left a little note beside the toaster, bread at the ready. As he'd left, he'd turned to look at the man sprawled on his back, half in and half out of the sheets. Even into his late 30s, Charlie had the lean, muscular torso, strong shoulders, and stout legs of a man who had spent much of his adult life on boats, hauling in nets, and the flat belly of someone who didn't spend too many nights out drinking. A quiet click of the door, then whistling into the wind like an idiot as soon as he'd taken a few steps, thanking the God who'd made him, in the end, so lucky, even if in such a delayed and unexpected way. Some things came to you late, but late was better than never. Soon the lighthouse rose solid and tall above him. It served as a day mark so boats could navigate the shallows, but also was lit at night half the week, corresponding to the schedules of commercial traffic. Bleh. Excuse me. Let's try that sentence again. Soon the lighthouse rose solid and tall above him. It served as a day mark so boats could navigate the shallows, but also was lit at night half the week, corresponding to the schedules of commercial traffic farther out to sea. He knew every step of its stairs, every room inside its stone and brick walls, every crack and bit of spackle. The spectacular 4-ton lens, or beacon, at the top had its own unique signature, and he had hundreds of ways to adjust its light. A first-order lens, over a century old. As a preacher, he thought he had known a kind of peace, a kind of calling, but only after his self-exile, giving all of that up, had Saul truly found what he was looking for. It had taken more than a year for him to understand why. Preaching had been projecting out, imposing himself on the world, with the world then projecting onto him. But tending to the lighthouse, that was a way of looking inward, and it felt less arrogant. Here he knew nothing but the practical, learned from his predecessor. How to maintain the lens, the precise workings of the ventilator and the lens access panel, how to maintain the grounds, how to fix all the things that broke, scores of daily tasks. He welcomed each part of the routine, relished how it gave him no time to think about the past, and didn't mind sometimes working long hours, especially now, in the afterglow of Charlie's embrace. But that afterglow faded when he saw what awaited him in the gravel parking lot, inside the crisp white fence that surrounded the lighthouse and the grounds. A familiar beat-up station wagon stood there, and beside it the usual two Seance and Science Brigade recruits. They'd snuck up on him again, crept in to ruin his good mood, and even piled their equipment beside the car already, no doubt in a hurry to start. He waved to them from afar in a half-hearted way. They were always present now, taking measurements and photographs, dictating statements into their bulky tape recorders, making their amateur movies. Intent on finding what? He knew the history of the coast here, the way that distance and silence magnified the mundane. How into those spaces and the fog and the empty line of the beach thoughts could turn to the uncanny okay, let's try that sentence again because I mangled the emphasis. How full of nope, that's the wrong paragraph. He knew the history of the coast here, the way that distance and silence magnified the mundane. How into those spaces and the fog and the empty line of the beach thoughts could turn to the uncanny and begin to create a story out of nothing. Saul took his time because he found them tiresome and increasingly predictable. They traveled in pairs, so they could have their seance and their science both, and he sometimes wondered about their conversations. How full of contradictions they must be, like the arguments going on inside his head toward the end of his ministry. Lately, the same two had come by, a man and a woman, both in their twenties, although sometimes they seemed more like teenagers, a boy and a girl who'd run away from home, dragging a store-bought chemistry set and a Ouija board behind them. Henry and Suzanne. Although Saul had assumed the woman was the superstitious one, it turned out she was the scientist. Of what? And the man was the investigator of the uncanny. Henry spoke with a slight accent, one Saul couldn't place, that put an emphatic stamp of authority on everything he said. He was plump, as clean-shaven as Saul was bearded, with shadows under his pale blue eyes, black hair in a modified bowl cut with bangs that obscured a pale, unusually long forehead. Henry didn't seem to care about worldly things, like the winter weather, because he always wore some variation on a delicate blue button-down silk shirt with dress slacks. The shiny black boots with zippers down the side weren't for trails, but for city streets. Suzanne seemed more like what people today called a hippie, but would have been called a communist or bohemian when Saul was growing up. She had blonde hair and wore a white embroidered peasant blouse and a brown suede skirt down below the knee, to meet the calf-high tan boots that completed her uniform. A few like her had wandered into his ministry from time to time, lost, living in their own heads, waiting for something to ignite them. The frailty of her form made her somehow more Henry's twin, not less. The two had never given him their last names, although one or the other had said something that sounded like serum list once, which made no sense. Saul didn't really want to know them better, if he was honest, had taken to calling them the Light Brigade behind their backs, as in lightweights. When he finally stood in front of them, Saul greeted them with a nod and a gruff hello, and they acted, as they often did, like he was a clerk in the village grocery store, and the lighthouse a business that offered some service to the public. Without the twins' permit from the Park Service, he would have shut the door in their faces. "Saul, you don't look very happy, even though it is a beautiful day," Henry said. "Saul, it's a beautiful day," Suzanne added. He managed a nod and a sour smile, which set them both off into paroxysms of laughter. He ignored that. But they continued to talk as Saul unlocked the door. They always wanted to talk, even though he'd have preferred that they just got on with their business. This time it was about something called necromantic doubling, which had to do with building a room of mirrors and darkness, as far as he could tell. It was a strange term, and he ignored their explanations, saw no way in which it had any relationship to the beacon or his life at the lighthouse. People weren't ignorant here, but they were superstitious, and given that the sea could claim lives, who could blame them? What was the harm of a good luck charm worn on a necklace, or saying a few words in prayer to keep a loved one safe? Interlopers trying to make sense of things, trying to analyze and survey, as Suzanne had put it, turned people off because it trivialized the tragedies to come. But like those annoying rats of the sky, the seagulls, you got used to the Light Brigade after a while. On dreary days he had almost learned not to begrudge the company. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but not notice the log in your own eye? Henry thinks the beacon could operate much like such a room, Suzanne said, as if this was some major and astounding discovery. Her enthusiasm struck him as serious and authentic, and yet also frivolous and amateurish. Perhaps she believed it as surely as every new convert to Christ. The newness and closeness removed any sense of doubt. But perhaps they were less like new converts than like traveling preachers who set up tents at the edges of small towns and had the fervor of their convictions, but not much else. Maybe they were even charlatans. The first time he'd met them, Saul thought Henry had said they were studying the refraction of light in a prison. as in bars and jail cells. Are you familiar with these theories? Suzanne asked as she started to climb. She was lightly adorned with a camera strapped around her neck and a suitcase in one hand. Henry was trying not to seem winded, and said nothing. He was wrestling with heavy equipment, some of it in a box. Mics, headphones, UV light readers, 8mm film, and a couple of machines featuring dials, knobs, and other indicators. No, Saul said, mostly to be contrary, because Suzanne often treated him like someone without culture, mistook his brusqueness for ignorance, his casual clothes as belonging to a simple man. Besides, the less he said, the more relaxed they were around him. It had been the same with potential donors as a preacher. And the truth was, he didn't know what she was talking about, just as he hadn't known what Henry meant when he'd said they were studying the Tewa, or terror, of the region, even when he'd spelled it out as Terroir. Prebiotic particles, Henry managed in a jovial, if wheezy tone. Ghost energy. As Suzanne backed that up with a longish lecture about mirrors and things that could peer out of mirrors and how you might look at something sideways and know more about its true nature than head on, he wondered if Henry and Suzanne were lovers. Her sudden enthusiasm for the seance part of the brigade might have a fairly prosaic origin. That would also explain their hysterical laughter down below. An ungenerous thought, but he'd wanted to bask in the afterglow of the night with Charlie. Meet you up there, he said finally, having had enough, and leapt up the stairs, taking them two at a time while Henry and Suzanne labored below, soon out of sight. He wanted as much time at the top without them as possible. The government would retire him at 50, mandatory, but he planned to be as in shape then as now, despite the twinge in his joints. At the top, hardly even breathing heavy, Saul was happy to find the lantern room as he'd left it, with the lens bag placed over the beacon, to avoid both scratching and discoloration from the sun. All he had to do was open the lens curtains around the parapet to let in light. His concession to Henry for just a few hours a day. Once, from this vantage, he'd seen something vast rippling through the water beyond the sandbars, a kind of shadow, the grayness so dark and deep it had formed a thick, smooth shape against the blue. Even with his binoculars he could not tell what creature it was, or what it might become, if he stared at it long enough. Didn't know if eventually it had scattered into 1,000 shapes, revealed as a school of fish, or if the color of the water, the sharpness of the light, changed and made it disappear, revealed as an illusion. In that tension between what he could and couldn't know about even the mundane world, he felt at home in a way he would not have 5 years ago. He needed no greater mysteries now than those moments when the world seemed as miraculous as in his old sermons. And it was a good story for down at the village bar, the kind of story they expected from the lighthouse keeper, if anyone expected anything from him at all. So that's why it's of interest to us, what with the way the lens wound up here, and how that relates to the whole story of both lighthouses, Suzanne said from behind him. She had been having a conversation with Saul in his absence, apparently, and seemed to believe he had been responding. Behind her, Henry was about ready to collapse, although the trek had become a regular routine. When he'd dropped the equipment and regained his breath, Henry said, "You have a miraculous view from up here." He always said this, and Saul had stopped giving a polite response, or any response. "How long are you here for this time?" Saul asked. This particular stint had already lasted 2 weeks, and he'd put off asking, fearing the answer. Henry's shadow-circled gaze narrowed. "This time our permit allows us access through the end of the year." Some old injury or accident of birth meant his head was bent to the right, especially when he spoke, right ear almost touching the upward slope of his shoulder. It gave him a mechanical aspect. Just a reminder, you can touch the beacon, but you can't in any way interfere with its function. Saul had repeated this warning every day since they'd come back. Sometimes in the past they'd had strange ideas about what they could and could not do. Relax, Saul, Suzanne said, and he gritted his teeth at her use of his first name. At the beginning they'd called him Mr. Evans, which he preferred. He took more than the usual juvenile pleasure in positioning them on the rug, beneath which lay a trap door and a converted watchroom that had once held the supplies needed to maintain the light before the advent of automation. Keeping the room from them felt like keeping a compartment of his mind hidden from their experiments. Besides, if these two were as observant as they seemed to think they were, they would have realized what the sudden cramping of the stairs near the top meant. When he was satisfied they had settled in and were unlikely to disturb anything, he gave them a nod and left. Halfway down, he thought he heard a breaking sound from above. It did not repeat. He hesitated, then shrugged it off, continued to the bottom of the spiral stairs. Below, Saul busied himself with the grounds and organizing the tool shed, which had become a mess. More than one hiker wandering through had seemed surprised to find a lighthouse keeper walking the grounds around the tower as if he were a hermit crab without its shell, but in fact there was a lot of maintenance required due to the way storms and the salt air could wear down everything if he wasn't vigilant. In the summer it was harder, with the heat and the biting flies. The girl, Gloria, snuck up on him while he was inspecting the boat he kept behind the shed. The shed abutted the ridge of soil and coquina parallel to the beach, and a line of rocks stretching out to sea. At high tide, the sea flowed up to reinvigorate tidal pools full of sea anemones, starfish, blue crabs, snails, and sea cucumbers. She was a solid, tall presence for her age, big for 9 and a half. And although Gloria sometimes wobbled on those rocks, there was rarely any wobble in her young mind, which Saul admired. His own middle-aged brain sometimes slipped a gear or two. So there she was again, a sturdy figure on the rocks, in her winter weather gear, jeans, hooded jacket and sweater underneath, thick boots for wide feet, as he finished with the boat and brought compost around back for the wheelbarrow. Around back in the wheelbarrow. Sorry. She was talking to him. She was always talking to him, ever since she'd started coming by about a year ago. "You know my ancestors lived here," she said. "Mama says they lived right here, where the lighthouse is." She had a deep and level voice for one so young, which sometimes startled him. I guess I'll have to change that. "So did mine, child," Saul told her, upturning the wheelbarrow load into the compost pile. Although truth was, the other side of his family had been an odd combination of rum runners and fanatics, who he liked to say, down at the bar, had come to this land fleeing religious freedom. Zounds. After considering Saul's assertion for a moment, Gloria said, "Not before mine." "Doesn't matter?" He noticed he'd missed some caulking on the boat. The child frowned. He could feel her frown at his back. It was that powerful. "I don't know." He looked over at her, saw she'd stopped hopping between rocks, had decided that teetering on a dangerously sharp one made more sense. The sight made his stomach lurch, but he knew she never slipped, even though she seemed in danger of it many times, and as many times as he talked to her about it, she'd always ignored him. "I think so."
she said, picking up the conversation. "I think it does."
"I'm 1/8 Indian," he said. "I was here too. Pardon me." For what that was worth. A distant relative had told him about the lighthouse keeper's job. It was true, but no one else had wanted it.
"So what?"
She said, jumping to another sharp rock, balancing atop it, arms for a moment flailing, and Saul taking a couple of steps closer to her out of fear. She annoyed him much of the time, but he hadn't yet been able to shake her loose. Her father lived in the middle of the country somewhere, and her mother worked 2 jobs from a bungalow up the coast. The mother had to drive to far off Bleekersville at least once a week, and probably figured her kid could manage on her own every now and again, especially if the lighthouse keeper was looking after her. And the lighthouse held a kind of fascination for Gloria that he hadn't been able to break with his boring shed maintenance and wheelbarrow runs to the compost pile. In the winter, too, she would be by herself a lot anyway, out on the mud flats just to the west, poking at fiddler crab holes with a stick, or chasing after a half-domesticated doe, or peering at a coyote or bear scat, I'm reading ahead and my brain is missing, let's reread the paragraph. In the winter, too, she would be by herself a lot anyway, out on the mud flats just to the west, poking at fiddler crab holes with a stick, or chasing after a half-domesticated doe, or peering at coyote or bear scat as if it held some secret. Whatever was on offer.
"Who are those strange people coming around here?" she asked.
That almost made him laugh. There were a lot of strange people hidden away on the forgotten coast, himself included. Some were hiding from the government, some from themselves, some from spouses. A few believed that they were creating their own sovereign states. A couple probably weren't in the country legally. People asked questions out here, but they didn't expect an honest answer. Just an inventive one. "Who exactly do you mean?"
"The ones with the pipes."
It took Saul a moment, during which he imagined Henry and Suzanne skipping along the beach, pipes in their mouths, smoking away furiously. Pipes. Oh, they weren't pipes. They were something else. More like huge translucent mosquito coils. He'd let the light brigade leave the coils in the back room on the ground floor a few months last summer. How in the heck had she seen that anyway?
"Who are they?"
She persisted, as she balanced now on 2 rocks, which at least meant Saul could breathe again. "They're from the island up the coast," which was true. Their base was still out on Failure Island, home to dozens of them, a regular warren. "Doin' tests," as the rumors went down at the village bar, where they did indeed like a good story. Private researchers with government approval to take readings. But the rumors also insinuated that the SNSB had some more sinister agenda. Was it the orderliness, the precision of some of them, or the disorganization of the others that led to this rumor? Or just a couple of bored, drunk retirees emerging from their mobile homes to spin stories? The truth was, he didn't know what they were doing out on the island, or what they had planned to do with the equipment on the ground floor, or even what Henry and Suzanne were doing at the top of the lighthouse right now.
"They don't like me," she said, "and I don't like them."
That did make him chuckle, especially the brazen, arms-folded way she said it, like she'd decided they were her eternal enemy.
"Are you laughing at me?"
"No," he said. "No, I'm not. You're a curious person. You ask questions. That's why they don't like you. That's all." People who asked questions didn't necessarily like being asked questions.
"What's wrong with asking questions?"
Nothing. Everything. Once the questions snuck in, whatever had been certain became uncertain. Questions opened the way for doubt. His father had told him that. "Don't let them ask questions. You're already giving them the answers, even if they don't know it."
"But you're curious too," she said.
"Why do you say that?"
You guard the light, and the light sees everything. The light might see everything, but he'd forgotten a few last tasks that would keep him out of the lighthouse for longer than he liked. He moved the wheelbarrow onto the gravel next to the station wagon. He felt a vague urgency, as if he should check on Henry and Suzanne. What if they had found the trapdoor and done something stupid, like fallen in and broken their strange little necks? Staring up just then, he saw Henry staring down from the railing far above, and that made him feel foolish, like he was being paranoid. Henry waved, or was it some other gesture? Dizzy, Saul looked away as he made a kind of wheeling turn, disoriented by the sun's glare, only to see something glittering from the lawn, half hidden by a plant rising from a tuft of weeds near where he'd found a dead squirrel a couple of days ago. Glass? A key? The dark green leaves formed a rough circle, obscuring whatever lay at its base. He knelt, shielded his gaze, but the glinting thing was still hidden by the leaves of the plant, or was it part of a leaf? Whatever it was delicate beyond measure, yet perversely reminded him of the 4-ton lens far above his head. The sun was a whispering corona at his back. The heat had risen, but there was a breeze that lifted the leaves of the palmettos in a rattling stir. The girl was somewhere behind him singing a nonsense song, having come back off the rocks earlier than he'd expected. Nothing existed in that moment except for the plant and the gleam he could not identify. He had gloves on still, so he knelt beside the plant and reached for the glittering thing, brushing up against the leaves. Was it a tiny shifting spiral of light? It reminded him of what you might see staring into a kaleidoscope, except an intense white. But whatever it was swirled and glinted and eluded his rough grasp, and he began to feel faint. Alarmed, he started to pull back. But it was too late. He felt a sliver enter his thumb. There was no pain, only a pressure, and then numbness. But he still jumped up in surprise, yowling and waving his hand back and forth. He frantically tore off the glove, examined his thumb, aware that Gloria was watching him, not sure what to make of him. Nothing now glittered on the ground in front of him. No light at the base of the plant. Slowly, Saul relaxed. Nothing throbbing in his thumb. There was no entry point, no puncture. He picked up the glove, checked it, couldn't find a tear. "What's wrong?" Gloria asked. "Did you get stung?" "I don't know," he said. He felt other eyes upon him then, turned, and there stood Henry. How had he gotten down the stairs so fast? Had more time passed than he'd imagined? Yes. Is something wrong, Saul?" Henry asked. But Saul could find no way to reconcile the concerned expression with any concern in the tone of his voice. Because there was none. Only a peculiar eagerness. "Nothing is wrong," he said, uneasy, but not knowing why he should be. "Just pricked my thumb." "Through your gloves? That must have been quite the thorn." Henry was scanning the ground like someone who had lost a favorite watch or a wallet full of money. "I'm fine, Henry. Don't worry about me." Angry more at looking silly over nothing, but also wanting Henry to believe him. "Maybe it was an electric shock." "Maybe." The gleam of the man's eyes was the light of a cold beacon coming to Saul from far off, as if Henry were broadcasting some other message entirely. "Nothing is wrong," Saul said again. Nothing was wrong. Was it? Sorry, just at the chapter break, I tend to look at comments. Um, oh, Warren, thank you for tuning in. And Coquina, Coquina, and I may be mispronouncing that. Nope, I think it's Coquina. It's like a rock material. I think it's made of like um, shells. Let's look it up. Let's look it up real quick. Definitions time. Coquina is a sedimentary rock that is composed either wholly or almost entirely of the transported, abraded, and mechanically sorted fragments of shells of mollusks, trilobites, brachiopods, or other invertebrates. The term coquina comes from the Spanish word for cockle and shellfish. Thanks, Wikipedia. It's basically a different kind of rock. I only knew about it because I used to live near a place that was somewhat coastal. And according to this, there aren't all that many places where coquina can show up because it is basically fossilized material. One of those places is North Carolina, which is not quite where I thought this was taking place in the southern reach, but close enough. The Forgotten Coast. Okay, one sec here. Basically, it's this kind of, yeah, it's this rocky material, kind of a rough rock. I've run into coquina elsewhere, though. So, as a building material, I think there's a building material called coquina as well that has like shell material in it. I might be totally off base because I've seen it in reference to that. Anyway, now that I am fluted up, moving right along. All of these chapter numbers starting with 3 zeros and then a number. I might have to find a way to winnow that down because saying 000 number is a little ridiculous. Well, it'll go down to 00 number eventually, so that's good, right? Maybe? Anyway. Bottom line, you'd find coquina at a beach, generally, unless it was like someplace that used to be an ocean. Uh, in the very distant past, it no longer is. 0002, Ghost Bird. On the third day in Area X, with Control as her sullen companion, Ghost Bird found a skeleton in the reeds. It was winter in Area X now, and this had become more apparent once the trail meandered away from the sea that had been their entry point. The wind was cold and pushed against their faces, their jackets, the sky a watchful gray-blue that held back some essential secret. The alligators and the otters and the muskrats had retreated into the mud, ghosts somewhere beneath the dull slap and gurgle of water. Far above, where the sky became a deeper blue, she caught a hint of some reflective surface, identified it as a wheeling cone of storks, the sun glinting silver from their white and gray feathers as they spun up into the sky at a great distance, and with a stern authority, headed where? She could not tell if they were testing the confines of their prison, able to recognize that invisible border before they crossed it, or, like every other trapped thing here, simply operating on half-remembered instinct. She stopped walking, and Control stopped with her. A man with prominent cheekbones, large eyes, an unobtrusive nose, and light brown skin. He was dressed in jeans and a red flannel shirt, along with a black jacket and a brand of boots that wouldn't have been her first choice for walking through the wilderness. The director of the Southern Reach. The man who had been her interrogator. An athlete's build, perhaps, but as long as they'd been in Area X, he'd been stooped over, muttering, as he examined forever and always a few water-stained, wrinkling pages he'd saved from some useless Southern Reach report. Flotsam from the old world. He barely noticed the interruption. "What is it?" he asked. "Birds." Birds? As if the word was foreign to him, or held no meaning. Or significance. But who knew what held significance here? Yes, birds. Further specificity might be lost on him. She took up her binoculars, watched the way the storks turned this way and that, turned this way and then that way, but never lost their form, a kind of living, gliding vortex in the sky. The pattern reminded her of the circling school of fish into which they'd emerged in shock. Excuse me. Their surprising entrance into Area X from the bottom of the ocean. Staring down at her, did the storks recognize what they saw? Were they reporting back to someone or something? 2 nights running, she had sensed animals gathering at the edge of their campfire, dull and remote sensors for Area X. Control wanted more urgency, as if a destination meant something, while she wanted more data. There had already been some misunderstandings about their relationship since reaching the beach, especially about who was in charge. And in the aftermath, he'd taken back his name, asked that she call him Control again, rather than John, which she respected. Some animals' shells were vital to their survival. Some animals couldn't live for long without them. His disorientation wasn't helped by a fever and a sense, from her own accounts of a brightness, that he too was being assimilated and might soon be something not himself. So perhaps she understood why he buried himself. I don't know why I'm having such a hard time with this today. Jeff VanderMeer is kind of a out there writer to begin with, and his sentence structure is generally not normal, not average. Let's try this again. So perhaps she understood why he buried himself in what he called my terroir pages. Why he had lied about wanting to find solutions when it was so clear to her that he just needed something familiar to hold on to. At one point on the first day, she had asked him, "What would I be to you back in the world, you at one of your old jobs and me at my old job?" He had not had an answer, but she thought she knew. She would be a suspect, an enemy of the right and the true. So what were they to each other here? Sometime soon she would have to force a real conversation, provoke conflict. But for now she was more interested in something off in the reeds to their left. A flash of orange? Like a flag? She must have stiffened, or her demeanor gave her away, because Control asked, "What's wrong? Is something wrong?" "Nothing, probably," she said. After a moment she found the orange again. A scrap, a tattered rag tied to a reed, bending back and forth in the wind. About 300 feet out in the reed ocean, that treacherous marsh of sucking mud. There seemed to be a shadow or depression just beyond it, the reeds giving way to something that couldn't be seen from their vantage. She loaned him the binoculars. "See it?" "Yes, it's a surveyor's mark," he said, unimpressed. "Because that's likely," she said, then regretted it. "Okay, then it's like a surveyor's mark." He handed back the binoculars. "We should stay on the trail, get to the island." A sincere utterance of island for once, proportional to his dislike of the unspoken idea that they investigate the rag. You can stay here, she said, knowing he wouldn't, knowing she would have preferred he remained behind so she could be alone in Area X for a few moments. Except, was anyone truly ever alone out here? I misread that entire sentence. Sorry. Well, okay, the middle bit. Except, was anyone ever truly alone out here? Sorry, this is winding up being kind of rough. Uh, being away from doing this for 2 weeks, this sort of thing takes a little practice, I guess. For a long time after she had woken in the empty lot, then been taken to the Southern Reach for processing, Ghostbird had thought she was dead, that she was in purgatory, even though she didn't believe in an afterlife. This feeling hadn't abated even when she'd figured out that she had come back across the border into the real world by unknown means, that she wasn't even the original biologist from the 12th expedition, but a copy. She had admitted as much to Control during the interrogation sessions. It was quiet and so empty. I waited there, afraid to leave, afraid there might be some reason I was meant to be there. But this didn't encompass the full arc of her thoughts, of her analysis. There was not just the question of whether she was really alive, but, if so, who she was, made oblique by her seclusion in her quarters at the Southern Reach. Then, examining the sense that her memories were not her own, that they came to her second hand, and that she could not be sure whether this was because of some experiment by the Southern Reach or an effect caused by Area X. Even through even through the intricacies of her escape on the way to Central, there was a sense of projection, of it happening to someone else, that she was only the interim solution, and perhaps that distance had aided her in avoiding capture, added a, added a layer of absolute calm to her actions. When she'd reached the remote rock bay, so familiar to the biologist who had been there before her, she'd had peace for a while, let the landscape subsume her in a different way, let it break her down so she could be built up again. But only when they had burst through into Area X had she truly gained the upper hand on her unease, her purposelessness. She had panicked for a second as the water pressed in on her, surrounded her, evoked her own drowning. But then something had turned on, or had come back, and raging against her own death, she had exulted in the sensation of the sea, welcomed having to fight her way to the surface, bursting through such a joyful hysteria of biomass, as a sort of proof that she was not the biologist, that she was some new thing that could, wanting to survive, cast out her fear of drowning as belonging to another. In the aftermath, even resuscitating Control on the beach had seemed undeniable proof of her own sovereignty, as had her insistence on heading for the island, not the lighthouse. Wherever the biologist would have gone, that is where I will go. The truth, the rightness in that had given her hope, despite the sense that everything she remembered she had observed. Okay, that is just a wonky sentence, don't mind me. The truth, the rightness in that had given her hope, despite the sense that everything she remembered she had observed through a window opening onto another person's life. Not truly experienced. Or not experienced yet. You want a lived-in life because you don't have one, Control had said to her, but that was a crude way to put it. There had been little new to experience since. Nothing monstrous or unusual had yet erupted from the horizon in almost 3 full days of walking. Nothing unnatural except for this hyper-real aspect to the landscape. Sorry. Oh. Nothing unnatural except for this hyper-real aspect to the landscape, these processes working beneath the surface. At dusk, too, an image of the biologist's starfish came to her, dimly shining, like a compass in her head that drew her on, and she realized that Control couldn't feel what she felt here. He couldn't navigate the dangers, recognize the opportunities. The brightness had left her, but something else had stepped in to replace it. Countershading, she'd said when he'd confessed his confusion that Area X looked so normal. You can know a thing and not know a thing. A grebe's markings from above are obvious. You cannot miss a grebe from above. Seen from below, though, as it floats in the water, it is practically invisible. Grebe? A bird. Another bird. All of this is a disguise? He said it with a kind of disbelief, as if the reality were strange enough. Ghostbird had relented, because it wasn't his fault. You've never walked through an ecosystem that wasn't compromised or dysfunctional, have you? You may think you have, but you haven't. So you might mistake what's right for what's wrong anyway. That might not be true, but she wanted to hold on to the idea of authority. Didn't want another argument about their destination. Insisted on heading for the island was protecting not just her life, but his too, she believed. She had no interest in last chances. Last desperate charges into the guns of the enemy, and something in Control's affect made her believe he might be working toward that kind of a solution. Whereas she was not yet committed to anything other than wanting to know herself and Area X. The light in that place was inescapable, so bright yet distant. It brought a rare clarity to the reeds and the mud and the water that mirrored and followed them in the canals. It was the light that made her feel as if she glided because it tricked her. Excuse me. Because it tricked her into losing track of her own steps. It was the light that kept replenishing the calm within her. The light explored and questioned everything in a way she wasn't sure Control would understand, then retreated to allow what it touched to exist apart from it. Perhaps it was the light that got in the way, too, for theirs was a kind of backtracking, stuttering progress, using a stick to prod the ground in front of them for treachery, the thick reeds forming clumps that at times were impenetrable. Once a limpkin, grainy brown and almost invisible against the reeds, rose so near and so silent it startled her almost more than it did Control. But eventually they reached the rag tied to the reeds, saw the yellowing cathedral beyond, stuck in the mud, and sunk halfway. "What the hell is that?" Control asked. "It's dead," she said. "It can't harm us." Because Control continued to overreact to what she considered insufficient stimuli, skittish or damaged from some other experience entirely. But she knew all too well what it was. Sunken into the middle were the remains of a hideous skull and a bleached and hardened mask of a face that stared sightless up at them, fringed with mold and lichen. "The moaning creature," she said. "The moaning creature we always heard at dusk." That had chased the biologist across the reeds. The flesh had sloughed off, runneled down the sides of the bones, vanished into the soil. What remained was a skeleton that looked Excuse me. Jeez. Am I not getting enough oxygen? What remained was a skeleton that looked uncannily like the confluence of a giant hog and a human being, a set of smaller ribs suspended from the larger like a macabre internal chandelier, and tibias that ended in peculiar nub-like bits of gristle scavenged by birds and coyotes and rats. It's been here a while, Control said. Yes, it has. Too long. Prickles of alarm made her scan the horizon for some intruder, as if the skeleton were a trap. Alive just 18 months ago, and yet now in a state... Oh my god. Jeez Louise, what is going on to me? I am so sorry. Alive just 18 months ago, and yet now in a state of advanced decay, the faceplate all that saved it from being unidentifiable. Even if this creature, this transformation of the psychologist from what Control called the last 11th expedition, had died right after the biologist had encountered it alive, the rate of decomposition was unnatural. Control hadn't caught on, though, so she decided not to share. He just kept pacing around the skeleton, staring at it. So this was a person once, he said, and then said it again when she didn't respond. Possibly. It might also have been a failed double. She didn't think she was a failed double like this creature. She had a purpose, free will. Perhaps a copy could also be superior to the original, create a new reality by avoiding old mistakes. I have your past in my head, he'd told her as soon as they'd left the beach, intent on trading information. I can give it back to you. An ancient refrain by now, unworthy of him or her. Unworthy of him or of her. Her silence had forced him to go first, and although she thought he still might be holding things back, his words, infused with urgency and a kind of passion, had a sincerity to them. Sometimes, too, a forlorn subtext crept in, one that she understood quite well and chose to ignore. She had identified it easily from the time he had visited her in her quarters back at the Southern Reach. The news that the psychologist from the 12th expedition had been the former director of the Southern Reach, and that she had thought the biologist was her special project, her special hope, made Ghostbird laugh. She felt a sudden affection for the psychologist, remembering their skirmishes during the induction interviews. The devious psychologist/director, trying to combat something as wide and deep as Area X with something as narrow and blunt as the biologist. As her. A sudden wren, quick darting through brambles to flit out of sight, seemed to share her opinion. When it was her turn, she conceded that she now remembered everything up to the point at which she had been scanned or atomized or replicated by the crawler that lived in the tunnel/tower, the moment of her creation, which might have been the moment of the biologist's death. The crawler and the lighthouse keeper's face, burning through the layered myths of its construction, made disbelief shine through Control as if he were a translucent deep-sea fish. Among all the impossible things he had already witnessed, what were a few more? He asked no questions that had not been asked in some form by the biologist, the surveyor, the anthropologist, or the psychologist during their 12th expedition. Somehow that created an uncomfortable doubling effect, too. One, one that she argued about in her own head. Because she did not agree with her own decisions at times. The biologist's decisions. Why had her other self been so careless with the words on the wall? For example, why hadn't she confronted the psychologist/director as soon as she knew about the hypnosis? What had been gained by going down to find the crawler? Some things Ghostbird could forgive, but others grated and drove her into spirals of might-have-beens that infuriated her. The biologist's husband she rejected entirely, without ambivalence, for there came with the husband the desolation of living in the city. The biologist had been married, but Ghostbird wasn't. released from responsibility for any of that. She didn't really understand why her double had put up with it. Among the misunderstandings between her and Control, having to make clear that her need for lived-in experience to supplant memories not her own did not extend to their relationship, whatever image of her he carried in his head. She could not just plunge into something physical with him and overlay the unreal with the ordinary, the mechanical, not when her memories were of a husband who had come home stripped of memories. Any compromise would just hurt them both, was somehow beside the point. Standing there in front of the skeleton of the moaning creature, Control said, Then I might end up like... Then I might Why can I not read today? Good golly, Miss Molly. Gulp. Standing there, in front of the skeleton of the moaning creature, Control said, Then I might end up like this? I cannot say end today. I'm sorry, gang. This is proving difficult. Gosh, that laugh is annoying. I'm so sorry. Standing there in front of the skeleton of the moaning creature, Control said, Then I might end up like this? Some version of me? We all end up like this, Control. Eventually. But not quite like this, because from those eye sockets, from the mouldering bones, came a sense of a brightness still, a kind of life, a questing toward her that she rebuffed and that Control could not sense. Area X was looking at her through dead eyes. Area X was analyzing her from all sides. It made her feel like an outline created by the regard bearing down. Give me a sec. Hard sentence again. I feel like my IQ dropped like 20 points in the last 2 weeks, and I'm having harder time than I should. I swear I haven't taken any blows to the cranium recently. It made her feel like an outline created by the regard bearing down on her, one that moved only because the regard moved with her, held her constituent atoms together in a coherent shape. And yet, the eyes upon her felt familiar. The director might have been wrong about the biologist, but perhaps you're the answer. Said only half sarcastically, as if he almost knew what she was receiving. I'm not an answer, she said. I'm a question. She might also be a message incarnate, a signal in the flesh, even if she hadn't yet figured out what story she was supposed to tell. I'm sorry I'm halting a lot. She was thinking, too, about what she had seen on the journey into Area X, how it had seemed as if to both sides there lay nothing around them but the terrible blackened ruins of vast cities and enormous beached ships, lit by the roaring red and orange fires that did nothing but cast shadow and obscure the distant... Jesus, how long is this sentence? This sentence is 5 lines long? Jeff, you're killing me. And there's like no punctuation either. There's a comma in the middle there. Okay, there are 3 commas in 5 lines. I'm sorry. Oh, sorry, no, 6 commas, but one of them is before and after 2. Okay. Okay. This always seems to happen to me towards the end of a chapter. I don't understand why. She was thinking, too, about what she had seen on the journey into Area X, how it had seemed as if to both sides there lay nothing around them but the terrible blackened ruins of vast cities and enormous beached ships, lit by the roaring red and orange fires that did nothing but cast shadow and obscure the distant view of mewling things that crawled and hopped through the ash. How she had tried to block out Control's rambling confessions, the shocking things he said without knowing, so that she did not think he had a secret she did not now know. What? Let's try that sentence again. How she How she had tried to block out Control's rambling confessions, the shocking things he said without knowing, so that she did not think he had a secret she did not now know. Pick up the gun. Tell me a joke. I killed her. It was my fault. Had whispered hypnotic incantations in his ear to shut out not only his words, but also the horror show around them. The skeleton before them had been picked clean. The discolored bones were rotting, the tips of the ribs already turned soft with moisture, most of them broken off, lost in the mud. Above, the storks still banked and wheeled this way and that in an intricate, synchronized aerial dance, more beautiful than anything ever created by human minds. Yeah, they really are Josh Kerr. Like, as much as I'd love to read Born aloud, there's so many like wordplay jokes in there that it's honestly like I've only read Born through once, and I was like, I don't know if I could read this aloud. Not because I don't want to, but because it's just like it's legitimately challenging. The sequel, Dead Astronauts, is maybe even more nutty because there's like visual word stuff that's done, like the words on the page form a shape, kind of sort of weird thing. Like it's like poetry. It's not traditional like written out page stuff. It's hard. It's tricky. But Born is like I'd love to, but man, uh, oy. We'll work on it. Okay, next chapter. He's a tricky author. He's not necessarily the trickiest author I've read. For all her complex sentence structure, CJ Cherry's stuff seems to just kind of make a lot more sense to read, whereas this is a bit more ambiguous, ooby shooby, flowery. It's very prosaic. There's Peter Watts is kind of tricky. Some of his books are harder than others. I feel like he's gotten trickier as time has gone on. Like the Rifters stuff is fairly easy to read, and then Echopraxia is like, like a lot goes down in very short pieces of text in Echopraxia and Blind Sight, where it's to the point where I'm just kind of like, what am I reading? What was I reading just 5 words ago? Things just took a turn, didn't they? Okay, sorry. Digression. Digression done. To say nothing of how hard The Moon is a Harsh Mistress was to read. Good gosh. 0003. The Director. On the weekends, your refuge is Chipper's Star Lanes, where you're not. Oh my god. I feel like I've been drugged or something and I can't read good. If this continues, I might have to call it after this chapter. Good gosh. I'm killing myself here. I'm so sorry. 0003, the director. On the weekends, your refuge is Chipper's Star Lanes, where you're not the director of the Southern Reach, but just another customer at the bar. Chipper's lies off the highway well out of Bleekersville, one step up from being at the end of a dirt road. Jim Lowry's people back at Central might know the place, might be watching and listening, but you've never met anyone from the Southern Reach there. Even Grace Stevenson, your second in command, doesn't know about it. For a disguise, you wear a t-shirt for a local construction company, or a charity event like a chili cook-off, and an old pair of jeans from the last time you were fat, sometimes topped off with a baseball cap advertising your favorite barbecue joint. You usually start out front, on Chipper's rotting but still functional Safari Adventure miniature golf course, like you used to with your dad when you were a kid. The lions at the ninth hole are a sleeping huddle of dreamy plastic, melted and blackened at the edges from some long ago disaster. The huge hippo, bestride the course-ending 18th, has dainty ankles, and flaked-off splotches reveal blood-red paint beneath, as if its makers had been too obsessed with making it real. Afterward, you'll go inside and bowl a few pickup games with anyone who needs a fourth, under the fading universe painted on the ceiling. There's Earth, there's Jupiter, there's a purpling nebula with a red center, all of it lit up at night with a cheesy laser show. I've been to this bowling alley, by the way. I have lived in this bowling alley. You're good for 4 or 5 games, rarely top 200. Rarely top 200. When done, you sit at the dark, comfortable bar. It's been shoved into a back corner as far from the room of stinking shoes as possible, and somehow the acoustics muffle the squeak, bump, and rumble of the bowling. Everything here is too close to Area X, but as long as no one knows, that information can keep on killing the customers as slowly as it has over the past decades. Okay. The Chippers Bar attracts mostly stalwart regulars, because it's really a dive, with dark felt stapled to the ceiling that's meant to be sprinkled with stars. But whatever the metal that's nailed up there, looking more like an endless series of sheriff's badges from old westerns, it's been rusting for a long time. So now it's become a dull black punctuated by tiny reddish-brown starfish. A sign in the corner advertises the Star Lanes Lounge. The lounge part consists of half a dozen round wooden tables and chairs with black fake leather upholstery that look like they were stolen long ago from a family restaurant chain. Most of your comrades at the bar are heavily invested in the sports leaking out of the silent, closed caption TV. The old green carpet, which climbs the side walls, soaks up the murmur of conversations. Man, remember when sports on TV in bars and like fooderies were silent? I barely remember. It's been like 20 years. The regulars are harmless and rarely raucous, including a realtor who thinks she is the knower of all things, but makes up for it by being able to tell a good story. Then there's the silver-bearded 70-year-old man, who's almost always standing at the end of the bar drinking a light beer. He's a veteran of some war, veers between laconic and neighborly. Your psychologist cover story feels wrong here, and you don't like using it. Instead, you tell anyone who asks that you're a long-haul trucker between jobs, and take a drag on your bottle of beer to end that part of the conversation. People find the idea of that line of work plausible. Maybe something about your height and broad frame sells them on it. But most nights you can almost believe you are a trucker, and that these people are your sort of friends. The realtor says the man's not a veteran, just an alcoholic looking for sympathy. But you can tell she's not without sympathy for that. I'm just going to opt out I'm just gonna opt out is a favorite phrase of the veteran. So is the hell there isn't. The rest are a cross-section of ER nurses, a couple of mechanics, a hairdresser, a few receptionists, and office managers. What your dad would have called people who are never allowed to see behind the curtain. You don't bother investigating them, or the oft-revolving bartenders, because it doesn't matter. You never say anything seditious or confidential at Chippers. But some nights, when you'll stay late and the bar crowd thins, you write down on a napkin or coaster a point or two you can't leave alone. Some of the continual puzzle questions thrown at you by Whitby Allen, a holistic environments expert who reports to Mike Cheney, the overly jovial head of the science division. You never asked for these questions, but that doesn't stop Whitby, who seems like his head's on fire and the only way to put the fire out is to douse it with his ideas. What's outside the border when you're inside it? What's the border when you're inside it? What's the border when someone is outside it? Why can't the person see inside the person outside? Wait, what? Why can't the person inside see the person outside? My statements aren't any better than my questions, Whitby admitted to you once, but if you want easy, you should check out what they serve up over at Cheney's Science Shack. An impressive document backs up Whitby's ideas, shining out from underneath the glossy, invisible membrane of a piece of clear plastic. In a brand new 3-ring black binder, exquisitely hole punched, not a typo in the entire 12-page printout. Slight alliteration. With its immaculate title page, a masterpiece entitled Combined Theories, a Complete Approach. The report is as shiny, clever, and quick as Whitby. The questions it raises, the recommendations made, insinuate with little subtlety that Whitby thinks the Southern Reach can do better, that he can do better if he is only given the chance. It's a lot to digest, especially with the science department ambushing it and taking potshots in memos sent to you alone. Suppositions in search of evidence, head on backwards or sideways. Or maybe even sprouting from his ass. But to you, it's deadly serious, especially a list of conditions required for Area X to exist that include an isolated place, an inert but volatile trigger, a catalyst to pull the trigger, an element of luck or chance in how the trigger was deployed, a context we do not understand, an attitude toward energy that we do not understand, an approach to language that we do not understand. What's next? Cheney says at one status meeting. A careful study of the miracles of the saints, unexplained occurrences writ large, two-headed calves predicting the apocalypse to see if anything rings a bell? Whitby at the time is a feisty debater, one who likes hot water, who leaps in with a rejoinder that he knows will not just get Cheney's goat, but pen it up, butcher it, and roast it. It acts a bit like an organism, like skin with a million greedy mouths instead of cells or pores, and the question isn't what it is, but is the motive. Think of Area X as a murderer we're trying to catch. Oh, great. That's just great. Now we've got a detective on staff, too. Cheney muttering while you give him the hush hand, and Grace helps out with her best pained smile. Because the truth is, you told Whitby to act like a detective. Okay. Whoops. I think he misuses commas. I'm pretty sure that's what's really messing with my head. Is he misuses commas and it throws me badly. It might not technically be misuse, but it is not use I am accustomed to. This from someone who reads C.J. Cherry, and C.J. Cherry also uses commas a lot. Because the truth is, you told Whitby to act like a detective in an attempt to think outside the Southern Reach. For a while, too, with Whitby's help, you are arrows shot straight at a target. Because it's not as if you don't have successes at first. Under your watch, there are breakthroughs in expedition equipment, like enhanced field microscopes and weaponry that doesn't trigger Area X's defenses. More expeditions begin to come back intact, and the refinements in making people into their functions, the tricks you've learned from living in your own disguise, seem to help. You chart the progress of Area X's reclamation of the environment, begin to get some small sense of its parameters, and even create expedition cycles with shared metrics. You may not always control those criteria, but, for a while, the consensus is that the situation has stabilized, that the news is improving. The gleaming silver egg you imagine when you think of Central, those seamless, high-level thoughts so imperfectly expressed through your superiors there, hums and purrs and pulses out approval all over you, even if it also emanates the sense that the Southern Reach is some kind of meat-brain corruption of a beautiful, elegant algorithm Central has hidden deep inside itself. That sentence barely makes sense, but I get it. But as the years pass, with Lowry's influence more and more corrosive, there's no solution forthcoming. Data pulled out of Area X duplicates itself and declines, or declines to be interpreted, as Whitby puts it, and theories proliferate, but nothing can be proven. We lack the analogies, the linguists keep saying. Grace starts to call them the languists as they falter, can't keep up, and the grim joke goes, what? Fell by the side of a road that was like a mixed metaphor of a tongue that curled up and took them with it. Jesus. Okay, let's reread that again. I'm not going to break it down, because breaking that down is... So there's actually some really brilliant bits of dialogue, particularly in the director sections, slash psychologist sections. Um, and this is one of them. And it's meaningful, but I don't think it matters to most people. And it doesn't actually matter to the plot. Grace starts to call them the languists as they falter, can't keep up, and the grim joke goes, fell by the side of the road that was like a mixed metaphor of a tongue that curled up and took them with it. Area X muddying the waters. So I could list out the punctuation there, but there's not very much, so I'm not going to do it. There's a lot of quotation marks. Except it wasn't muddying waters or a tongue by the side of the road or anything else, muddled or not, that they could understand. We lack the analogies was itself somehow deficient as a diagnosis. Linguists burning up during re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere after encountering Area X, making you think of all the dead and dying satellites sent hurtling down into the coordinates that comprised Area X, because it was easy, because space debris winking out of existence made a perverse kind of sense, even as turning Area X into a garbage can seemed like the kind of disrespect that might piss off an insecure deity. Except Area X never responded, even to that indignity. The linguists aren't really the problem, nor even Central. Lowry's the problem, because Lowry keeps your secret, that you grew up in what became Area X, and in return you have to try to give him what he wants, within reason. Lowry has invested other people's blood and sweat in the idea of the expeditions, and implied by that the idea of the border as an impenetrable barrier, which means he's safe on the right side of the divide. While Whitby keeps pushing against the traditional. Whatever we think of the border, it's important to recognize it as a limitation of Area X. Was that important? What seemed more important to you? The truth to rumors about Lowry's ruthlessness once he reached Central, that he had carved out his own soundproof shop. The whispers that came back to you, distant but clear over the years, like hiking in a dark, still forest and hearing the faint sound of wind chimes. Something that beckons, promising all the comforts of civilization, but once the seeker reaches the end of that particular path, all she finds is a slaughterhouse piled high with corpses. The proof of it in the way he so easily overrules Pittman, your nominal boss at Central, and presses you harder for results. Presses you harder for results. Oy. By the time you're on the 11th cycle of expeditions, you're more and more drained, and Central's plan has begun to change. The flow of new personnel, money, and equipment has been reduced to a trickle as Central spends more of its time crushing domestic terrorism and suppressing evidence of impending ecological destruction. You return after long days to the house in Bleekersville, which is no refuge. The ghosts follow, sit on the couch, or peer in through the window. Thoughts you don't want creep in at odd moments. In the middle of status meetings, sitting down for lunch with Grace in the cafeteria, searching idly for Central's latest bugs in your office. That maybe none of this is worth it, that you're not getting anywhere. The weight of each expedition leaning in on you. "I could have been director," Lowry boasted once, "but a warning light came on in the cockpit and I took the hint." The warning light is a fear that you know lives inside of him, but Lowry will never admit to it. The cruel jocularity to his goading, as if he knows he keeps asking you for the impossible. As if he knows he keeps asking you for the impossible. I don't know if I read the if before. I'm rereading it anyway. Always worried, in a continual low-grade fever sort of way, that someone at the Southern Reach or Central will discover your secret, that Lowry won't be able to bury the information forever. Or he'll divulge it himself, having decided you're disposable. Security risk. A liar. Too emotionally invested. And yet, compassion is what you most distrust, what you thrust away from you, preferring to project with everyone but Grace that you're cold, distant, even harsh, so that you can be clear-headed and objective, even if acting the part has made you a little cold, distant, and harsh. In some unquantifiable way, too, you believe Lowry's approach is pushing the Southern Reach farther away from the answers, like an astronaut headed into the oblivion of vast and empty space who, in flailing about, only speeds up the moment when he is beyond rescue. And worse, to your way of thinking, reliving and worse, to your way of thinking, reliving without nostalgia the thrust of your days as a psychologist. Okay, that's a comma, not a period. Frickadoodle. This is another, like, 4-line sentence with more comma breaks in it than anything else. Man, read some C.J. Sherry. Learn how to use a semicolon. And the odd hyphen. Spice up your punctuation. Sorry. And worse, to your way of thinking, reliving without nostalgia the thrust of your days as a psychologist, Lowry has doomed himself to finding countless ways to relive his own horrifying experience in Area X, so he can never be entirely free, the seeming attempt to cast it away turned into an endless embrace. Your other sanctuary is the roof of the Southern Reach Okay, that was quick. Your other sanctuary is the roof of the Southern Reach building, protected from view from below by the weird baffling, the wandering ridge, the circle that. That's not the right way to read that. Protected from view from below by the. Of course, I just gave him sass for not using enough different kinds of punctuation, and he immediately puts in a long hyphen. Because of course he does. Of course he does. Thanks, Jeff. You're listening to me. He's listening to me. In the book that he wrote back in 2014. Listen, time has no meaning. Your other sanctuary is the roof of the Southern Reach building, protected from view from below by the weird baffling, the wandering ridge that circles the roof. Beyond reach, BR for short, brr in the winter, and brr. Oh God, he's doing it. Okay, so I'm gonna have to explain all of these. Let me get through the sentence and then I'll explain all of these. Let's do that. That circles the roof. Beyond reach. BR for shirt. For short, burr in the winter, and burr, or sometimes BR or bear in the summer. Always bar when you sneak up for drinks after work. So the first is beyond reach, the letters B and R in capitals. The next is quote BRR. The next after that is BURR, like a Scottish burr, or, the little things that stick to your clothes, the plant. Or sometimes BR, BEE hyphen ARR exclamation point, or bear exclamation point in the summer. Always BAR, bar, when you sneak up for drinks after work. So, that's a word series of word jokes that doesn't work if you read it aloud. Thanks, Jeff. Now imagine that, but like every other chapter. Um, and that's born. Like it's a bit flowery. It reads great though. Also, I like this chapter because there's a reference to a weird movie by Alejandro Jodorowsky. Is it Alexandro or Alejandro? Alexandro Jodorowsky. Jodorowsky. It's there, staring out at the prehistoric swamp. Oh, wait, no, shoot. You skipped a paragraph. Why would you do this? You share this sacred space with only one person, Grace. You bat around the ideas that pop up at Star Lanes. Shoot the shit, protected by the fact that only you, Grace, and the janitor have the key. Many times people will try to track you down, only to find you have evaporated, reappearing unbeknownst to them in beyond reach. It's there, staring out at the prehistoric swamp, the miles of dark pine forest, that you and Grace come up with all the nicknames. The border you call the moat, and the way in is the front door, although both of you are always hoping you'll find a side door or a trap door. The tunnel or topographical anomaly in Area X you refer to as El Topoff, riffing on a strange film Grace once saw with her girlfriend. It's a reference to El Topo by Jodorowsky. It's a weird movie. Um, I often get the details of that film conflated with Greaser's Palace for some reason. Okay, I know the reason. The reason is because I watched them like back to back at some weird offbeat art film festival once many years ago. And ever since, I cannot keep the two movies straight. Greaser's Palace is the one with Robert Downey Sr. In it, and he has song and dance numbers. It's really quite interesting. Also, definitely what happens if you take way too many drugs and make a movie. Okay, digression gone, done, finished. A lot of it is stupid, but funny in the moment, especially if you've got a bottle of brandy, or if she brings cherry-flavored cigarettes, and you pull up a couple of lawn chairs and brainstorm or talk about the weekend to come. Grace knows about chippers, like you know about her canoe trips with her friends. Your addiction to paddles. You don't need to tell her not to show up at chippers, and you never invite yourself downriver. The circumference of your friendship is the length and breadth of the southern reach. It's on the roof that you first mentioned to Grace your idea of sneaking across the border into Area X. Over time, it has become more than a thought tingling at the edge of things, metastasizing as code, as a road trip with Whitby, since the expeditions during the 10th and 11th cycles have fared much better, even if there aren't any answers either. You can't take Grace, although you need her counsel. because that would be like cutting off two heads at once if anything went wrong, and you've never thought Grace had the temperament for it. Too many connections to the world. Children, sisters, an ex-husband, a girlfriend. It's Grace who you joke is your external moral compass and knows better than you where the boundaries are. Too normal, you wrote on a napkin once. Why do you let Lowry tell you what to do? Grace says to you one afternoon, after you've directed the conversation that way. You deflect/refract. Lowry isn't your direct boss, is more like slant rhyme, not there at the end of things, but still in control. Grace would have to know how Lowry's gotten his hooks in. Grace would have to know how Lowry's gotten his hooks in at Central, and how he got his hooks into you, and you've managed to shield her from that. You remind Grace that there is a part of the kingdom you do control, that Lowry doesn't get to influence, what comes out of Area X from the expeditions. It's all processed through the Southern Reach, and so when the latest 11th expedition came back with nothing to show for it except some blurry photographs left behind at base camp by the prior expedition, or perhaps one even earlier, you took them away and stared at them for hours. A collection of shadows against a black background. But was that a wall? Was that a texture that reminded you of another photograph from another expedition? So you pulled all of the photographs taken inside El Topov. It should be El Topov. Whatever. All 13 of them. And, yes, these new ones could have been taken in the tunnel, too. That shadow, that faint outline of a face, is that familiar? Would it be wrong of you to believe it means something? Confessing your simple plan to Grace, showing her some of the evidence, you're betting that she won't betray you to Central, but you know she might, out of a respect for the rules. Because behind all of your reasons, your data, you worry that it just boils down to being tired of the feeling in the pit of your stomach every time another expedition doesn't come back, or only half comes back, or comes back with nothing. Needing to somehow change the paradigm. It's just a quick jaunt over to El Topoff and back. No one will ever find out. Although Lowry might. What will he do if he finds out you crossed the border without his approval? Would his anger be directed just at you? After a pause, Grace says, "What do you need from me?" Because she can see it is important, and that you'll do it whether she helps you or not. The next thing she says is, "Do you think you can convince Whitby?" "Yes, I do," you say, and Grace looks skeptical. But Whitby's not a problem. Whitby's eager, like a yipping terrier wanting to go for a long, long walk. Whitby wants out of the science department for a while. Whitby's the one reassuring you by citing the survival rate of the last few expeditions. Whitby's so invigorated by the opportunity that you can almost forget the whole idea is dangerous. It's a relief, because you realize that weekend, as you exchange small talk with the realtor, that you were terrified of going alone. Realize, watching a football game on the bar TV, below that canopy of transfixed and rusting heavens, that if Whitby hadn't said yes, you might have called the whole thing off. Through the door, on your way to Area X, you feel a kind of pressure that bends you low, see a black horizon full of shooting stars, their trails bleeding so rich and deep across the non-sky that you squint against the brilliance of that celestial welder's torch. A sense of teetering, of vertigo, but each time you lurch too far to one side or the other, something. Okay, that is an unnecessary comma. I'm confident. I'm confident that's an unnecessary comma. Sorry. A sense of teetering, of vertigo, but each time you lurch too far to one side or the other, something nudges you back toward the center, as if the edges, closer than they seem, curl up at a more severe angle. Your thoughts dart quick, then slow, something stitching between them you cannot identify. You cannot identify. There we go. Enunciate. The impulse comes to the impulse comes to stop walking, to just stand there in the corridor between the real world and Area X for an eternity. While hypnotized, Whitby shuffles along, eyes closed, his face a twitching mass of tics as if he's having an intense dream. Whatever haunts him inside his own head, you've made sure he won't get lost, won't just come to a halt somewhere in transit. He's tied to you by the wrists with a nylon rope, and he stumbles along behind. The molasses feeling Whitby told you to expect comes next. The sense of wading through thigh-high water, the resistance that means you are close to the end, a hint of the deep, spiraling door of light far ahead, and just in time, because stoic as you could be, Whitby's dream-walking has begun to get to you, makes you think things look in at you. And you lose the sense of where you are in relation to anything, even your own body. Are you really walking? Or are you standing still and your brain just thinks that your feet are lifting up, falling down, lifting up again? Until the resistance falls away like a breath held too long and then released, and you both stumble through the door and out into Area X. With Whitby on all fours, hugging the ground, shaking convulsively, and you pulling him free and past so he won't accidentally stagger in the wrong direction and disappear forever. He's gasping like you both are gasping, from the freshness of the air, acclimating to it. Such a blue, cloudless sky. A trail that should be so familiar, but it has been decades since you saw the forgotten coast. It will take more than a moment to think of it as home. You recognize the trail more from photographs and the accounts of expedition members. Know it was here before the first invaders, was used by some of your long-ago ancestors, and has even now survived, overgrown, as part of Area X. Can you walk? You ask Whitby, once you've brought him back to his senses. Of course I can walk. Enthusiastic, but a kind of brittle sheen behind it, as if something has already been stripped away underneath. You don't ask him what he dreamed, what he saw. You don't want to know until you're back across. You had reviewed those toxic Area X video clips from the doomed first expedition not to seek answers, but, with some measure of guilt, to seek a connection with the wilderness you'd known as a child. To reinforce your memories, to recall what you could not recall. Pushing past the screams, the disorientation, and the lack of comprehension, past Lowry's weeping, past the darkness. There you can see the line of rocks near the lighthouse, the shore already a little different then, as if Whitby's terroir could be traced through the patterns left by the surf. As if down there, amid the sand crab holes and the tiny clams digging in every time the water reveals them, some sample might hold all the answers. The trails, too. A dark stillness of the pine trees and thick underbrush mottled by strangled light. The memory of being disoriented and lost in a thunderstorm at the age of 6, of emerging from that forest not knowing where you were, brought out of you by the cautious, quiet way the expedition leader noted looming clouds, as if they presaged something more than a need to find shelter. After the storm, in the startling revelation of open space and sunlight, you'd encountered a huge alligator blocking the narrow path, with water on both sides. You'd taken a running start and jumped over it. Never told your mother about the exhilaration, the way you had in mid-leap dared a glance down to see that yellow eye, that dark vertical pupil, appraise you, take you in like Area X had taken in the first expedition. And then you were over and past, running for a long time out of sheer joy, sheer adrenaline, like you'd conquered the world. The running on the screen toward the end is away from something, not towards something, and the screams later not of triumph but of defeat. Tired screams, as of weariness at fighting against something that would not properly show itself. Tired screams, as of weariness at fighting against something that would not properly show itself. In your more cynical moments, you thought of them as perfunctory screams. An organism that knows there is no point in fighting back, the body capitulating, and the mind letting it. They were not lost as you were lost that day. They had no cottage by the sea to return to, no mother pacing on the deck, worried out of her mind, grateful for your sudden, grimy, soaked appearance. Something on your face must have retained the memory of your joy, because she didn't punish you, just got you in dry clothes and fed you, and asked no questions. Bypassing the route to base camp, you head for the topographical anomaly with the urgency of a ticking clock driving you. The knowledge, never discussed with Whitby, that the longer you stay, the longer you seem to linger, the greater the opportunity for disaster. That alligator eye staring up at you, with more awareness behind its piercing gaze than you remember. Someone off camera on the second day of the first expedition saying, "I want to go home," and Lowry, goofing around, so confident, saying, "What do you mean? This is our home now. We've got everything here. Everything we need. Right?" Nowhere is this sense of urgency more intense than while passing through the swampy forest that lies a mile or two from the border, where the woods meet a dank, black water gutter. The place where you most often saw evidence of bears and heard things rustling in the darkness of the tree cover. Whitby's often silent, and when he speaks his questions and concerns do not and when he speaks, his questions and concerns do nothing to alleviate the pressure of that gloom, that sense of intent, eternal and everlasting. Oh, the sense of intent, eternal and everlasting, that occupies this stretch of land, that predates Area X. The still, standing water, the oppressive blackness of a sky in which the blue peers down through the trees at startling intervals, only to be taken away again, and only ever seeming to come to you from 1,000 miles off anyway. Is this the clearing where 3 men died during the 5th expedition? Does that pond hold the bodies of men and women from the first 8th? Sometimes, immersed in these overlays, Whitby's pale whispering form is a jolting shock to you, inseparable from these echoes of prior last days. Whoops. Eventually, though, you cross into a more optimistic landscape, one in which you can adapt, reconcile past and present into one vision. Here, a wider path separates the continuing dank swamp forest from open ground, allows you a horizon of a few tall pines scattered among the wild grass and palmetto circles. The lean of that forest means that the darkness ends at an angle, casting half the trail in a slanted shade. There are other borders within Area X, other gauntlets, and you have passed through one to get to the topographical anomaly. Once there, you know immediately that the tower isn't made of stone. And so does Whitby. Does he wish, now, his expression unreadable, that you had put him through conditioning, that he'd been given all the training Central could bestow, not your half measures, your shoddy hypnotism? The tower is breathing. There is no ambiguity about it. The flesh of the circular top of the anomaly rises and falls with the regular rhythm of a person deep in sleep. No one mentioned this aspect in the reports. You aren't prepared for it, but how easily you acclimate, give yourself up to it, can already imagine descending even as a part of you is floating, ascending to look down on the foolishness of this decision. Will it wake up while you're inside it? The opening leading into darkness resembles a maw more than a passageway, the underbrush around it pushed back, squashed in a rough framing circle, as if some now absent serpent had once curled around it in a protective mode. The stairs form a curling snarl of crooked teeth, the air expelled smelling of thick rot. I can't go down there, Whitby says, in such a final way that he must be thinking that in the descent he would no longer be Whitby. The hollows of his face, even in that vibrant late summer light, make him look haunted by a memory he hasn't had yet. Then I'll go, you offer, down into the gullet of the beast. Others have, if rarely, and come back, so why not you? Wearing a breathing mask, just to be safe. There is a dazed panic and coiled restraint behind your every movement that will come out later through the flesh, the bone. Months from now you will wake sore and bruised, as if your body cannot forget what happened, and this is the only way it can express the trauma. Inside, it's different than in the fragmentary reports brought back by the other expeditions. The living tissue curling down the wall is almost inert, the feeble wanderings of the tendrils that form the words so slow that you think for a moment it's all necrotic tissue. Nor are the words a vibrant green as reported, but a searing blue, almost the color of a flame on a stovetop. The word dormant comes to mind, and with it a wild hope that everything beneath you will be inert, normal, even if at the outer boundary of what that word means. You keep to the middle, do not touch either wall, try to ignore the shuddering breath of the tower. You don't read the words because you have long seen that as a kind of trap, a way to become distracted. And still the sense that whatever will disorient and destabilize lies below you. According what? Where did I get according? Deciding whether to be seen or remain unseen. Around a corner. Perhaps beyond. Where did I get perhaps? My brain's doing weird things. I am so sorry. Let's take this. It's not really a sentence, it's more like a paragraph. Where's the period? Where's the period, Frag? The period is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and a half lines down. Cool. Basically 7 lines. Almost. Yeah, it's basically 7 lines. You don't read the words because you have long seen that as a kind of trap, a way to become distracted. And still the sense that whatever will disorient and destabilize lies below you, deciding whether to be seen or remain unseen. Around a corner, beyond the horizon, and with each new empty reveal, each curve of the steps lit by the blue flames of dead words, toward an unknown become shy. You are wound ever tighter, even though there is nothing to be seen. The hell of that, the hell of nothing at all, which feels as if you are reliving every moment of your life at the southern reach, descending for no reason, for nothing, to find nothing. No answers, no solution, no end in sight. The words on the wall not getting fresher, but darker, seeming to wink out as you come upon them. Until, finally, you glimpse a light far, far below. So far below, it's like a glowing flower in a hole at the bottom of the sea, a glimmering, elusive light that through some magician's trick also hovers right in front of your face, giving you the illusion that you can reach out and touch it if you only can find the courage to extend your hand. But that's not what makes your legs ropey, a rush of blood surging through your brain. Bleh. A figure sits hunched along the side of the left-hand wall, staring down the steps. A figure with head bowed, turned away from you. A prickling engulfs your head under your mask, a kind of smooth, seamless insertion of a million cold, painless needles, ever so subtle, ever so invisible, so that you can pretend it is just spreading heat against your skin, just a spreading heat against your skin, a taut feeling across the sides of your nose, around your eyes, the quiet, soft entry of needles into a pincushion, the return of something always meant to be there. You tell yourself this is no less or more real than bowling at Chippers, than the hippo with the red paint under the skin, than living in Bleekersville, working at the Southern Reach. That this moment is the same as every other moment, that it makes no difference to the atoms, to the air, to the creature whose walls breathe all around you. That you gave up the right to call anything impossible when you decided to enter Area X. You come closer, drawn by this impossible thing, sit on the step next to him. His eyes are shut. His face is illuminated by a dark blue glow that emanates from within, as if his skin has been taken over, and he is as porous and volcanic. He is wow, okay. And he is as porous as volcanic rock. He's fused to the wall, or jutting out from it, like an extension of the wall, something that protrudes but might be retracted at any moment. Are you real? You ask, but he says nothing in reply. Reaching out to him, extending a trembling hand, awestruck by this apparition, wanting to know what that skin feels like, even as you're afraid your touch will turn him to powder. Your fingers graze his forehead, a rough, moist feel, like touching sandpaper under a thick layer of water. Do you remember me? You shouldn't be here, Saul Evans says under his breath. His eyes are closed. He cannot see you, and yet you know he sees you. You need to get off the rocks. The tide's coming in. You don't know what to say. You won't know what to say for a long time. Your reply was so many years ago. Now you can hear the vast, all-consuming hum of some mighty engine from below, the swift revolving of strange orbits, and the light below, that impossible, flowering light, is fluctuating, shifting, turning into something else. His eyes snap open, white against the darkness. He's no different than when you last saw him, has not aged, and you're 9 again, and the light below is coming up toward you, coursing up the steps toward you, fast, and from above you can hear the distant echo of Whitby screaming from the top of the tower, as if he's screaming for both of you. And on that dramatic ending, we're going to call it for today. Sorry about the roughness. Hopefully that will not continue in subsequent readings, but it probably will. Um, Geez, okay, so how many pages was that? That was like a little shy 50, I think. Dum dee dum dee dum dee doo dee doo dee doo dee doo. Where's the beginning of Excuse me. Let's see. Actually, it's just shy. Uh, it's just shy 40. I take it back. Yeah, yeah, just shy 40. If we do chunklets like that, we're looking at one Chunkasippy. Let me get this whole thing over here. One Chunkasippy, two Mississippi, three Mississippi. Come on. Four Mississippi, probably 6 entries, give or take, if I'm lucky. Alrighty. So yeah, That's the opening couple chapters of Acceptance by Jeff VanderMeer. Hopefully next time I won't be apparently drugged or whatever the hell's going on. Am I like pinching a nerve or something? I don't know. Weird. Feeling odd. Not sick. Don't know what's going on. Didn't had a great night's sleep. I was super hyped to do this. Maybe it's because I was excited to do something. And God was like, hey, don't be excited to do things. I come bearing gifts of disappointment. And I said, no, don't do. Anyway, yeah. So we'll continue with this next week. Let me look at my schedule going forward. I should be able to. So the only interruption that is liable to occur. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, okay. So I've got a thing I've got to do the week of the 25th in August. So I will definitely be missing the stream for this then. But we'll be good to do that to actually that'll probably be the final installment will be September 1st at a guess, assuming nothing else goes weird in the meantime. Also assuming I don't wind up like doubling down and doing like half again as many pages, which I may well do. Today it's not going to happen, but wow, that's a solid thunk. I hope nobody heard that. Anyway, oh, geez, I have not looked at chat. I'm sorry, great news. I did not see your comment half an hour ago, 45 minutes ago. I finished listening to part 7 of Authority just yesterday. What a coincidence. Well, I am glad you're tuning in for this. As always, I do these every Friday on Free Read Friday. Well, okay, every Friday that I'm around. I just got finished explaining a Friday I'm not going to be. Whatever. Suffice it to say, yes, starting at about noon Eastern Standard Time, they all get uploaded to YouTube. I will make probably this weekend. Worst case, next weekend or the weekend after. Okay. At some point in the near future, I will be making the playlist for this book specifically. Um, I don't know if I should make it just a single playlist for the Area X trilogy and just have all of them in there, or should I do one for each individual book? Can I make a playlist with playlists in it? Is that a thing I can do? I guess I could make a. Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be hard to set that up as a. Maybe I'll do both. Whatever. Anyway, yeah, I'm gonna say a lot apparently today. Brain is foggy. I don't know what's going on. So yeah, hope people enjoyed. The sentence structure is weird and it's throwing me, and the fact that it changes slightly between different characters probably doesn't help much. But we'll get through it. Think of it as oh geez, you want to talk about shifts in writing and characters. When I get around to doing the Hyperion cantos, boy howdy, that's gonna be an endeavor. I am so excited for that, mostly because I love that book, but also because that's gonna give me a way to really um, show off some of my some chaps. So I gotta come up with a number of voices for that. I think it's like eight like reasonably main characters. One or two of them don't count, but and probably like a lot of other recurring characters that I'm gonna have to worry about. Anyway, that's basically a trilogy in and of itself too. Or is it a duology? I think it's a trilogy, right? It's kind of a trilogy. Where the first book is kind of like their backstory vignettes, the middle book is the journey, and then the last book is the conclusion. Or is it just 2 books? It's been a while. We'll figure it out. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Get hyped for that. I'm hyped. And yeah, I do other streams throughout the week. I've got a Mecha Mondays stream where I do something giant robot related or mecha adjacent. What is that construction vehicle doing? I'm not going to look at that because I'm going to get anxiety. Just editing that out of my perception right now. Just saw a couple near misses in very short order. That was yikes. Anyway, I also have a Warframe Wednesdays stream on Wednesdays, where I do something Warframey for a couple hours. It was intended as a crowd pleaser back when I was first starting doing the streaming thing as part of a stream team, which the intro video I do is I have there is a now ancient relic of, but by internet standards anyway. But now basically nobody tunes into that. Everybody tunes into this, which I was like absolutely certain no one would. So I'm like, trust me, you have no idea how happy I am that people tune into this. Absolutely no idea. Well, maybe you do. I don't know. Until we can communicate empathically or telepathically, you won't know exactly how happy it makes me that people tune into this. To the point where I'm considering just replacing all my other streams with other reading streams, but that is also harsh on my throat, and I can't talk all day. Um, anyway, if I do ever have schedule changes, I'll try to make it clear, at least in a preceding stream, that those schedule changes are going to happen. If I do wind up having a more permanent schedule change arrangement, I'll change whatever details I have on both YouTube and Twitch. I stream to both. YouTube is where they're all there as a semi-permanent home. I really have to get around to downloading my own auxiliary backup copies. I have to do that. 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 I meant to do that before doing the helicopter story because in case my account got nuked for some reason, which it didn't, obviously. We're here. Hi. The dust settled on that one, I guess, which is nice. Thanks again, by the way, for the excellent, excellent, excellent comment, Kerr. I I like still go back and reread it. Wow, I don't actually check comments super duper often, but I do try to make sure they're there, that I'm looking. Yeah, it was you, Josh Kerr. Thank you again very much for that one on helicopter story. I really appreciated it. Um, it's great. It like says everything I could have wanted to say and then some. So it's good. I will take to heart and look at doing finding some short stories I can discuss the impact of culturally or otherwise. Um, I'm gonna have to start thinking outside this one, thinking outside the box. This one was an easy example in that it's got a very well documented impact. Um, but I think I could find some stuff that at least comes close to qualifying, just something at least discussion worthy. As far as here's a short story talking about some sort of aspect of society or technological idea or what have you, um, and how it's relevant, sort of thing. I could maybe even do ones for like really old short stories and say how they were relevant, historically relevant or contextually relevant to the time, but I'd have to actually do work to do that. So those will happen when they happen. Anyway, thanks again. Uh, and thanks to anyone who watches these after the fact or during the stream. Again, starts at about noon Eastern Standard Time. I'm sometimes a couple minutes late. Sometimes I'm more than a couple minutes late. I'm very, very rarely early. This was actually going to be an early day, um, but then I got sidetracked because that's how we do. That's how we do. Anyway, thanks again. Um, what would be the background I put into it, though? I don't know. Just kind of like I'm thinking. Actually, it's not a short story, but it's pretty cool. Is a book called. Okay, give me 30 seconds here. I've got it on my wall. I have to dig it out. It's a layer deep. Please come with me. Come with me, headset, as I sojourn to the wall. I don't want to get the title wrong. I know the author's name. It's Otto Willie Gale. And it is, I believe, From the Earth to the Moon. And the main reason for doing From the Earth to the Moon is because it describes in staggering detail the science behind doing a rocket trip from, drumroll please, the Earth to the Moon. And it was written in like the 20s or 30s. Oh my God, where is it? I'm losing my mind. I am absolutely losing my mind. I have the book. This is what happens when you have too many books and everything's a gosh darn mess. Is that it? That's it. There we go. Okay, I have to find something to put these other books. Heave! Oh, I don't want to damage that. By Rocket to the Moon by Otto Willie Gale, and it was written in 1931. And it gets the physics right. It gets the science right. They knew how to build rockets back then and woulda, coulda done it. Um, Aside from, taking off of a railway car, but it still makes it. Actually, it still that still works. Um, like they get the math, they get the distances, they get basically everything right, except some of the details of what stuff is like on the moon. There is no atmosphere on the moon, as people now know, but back then it was more speculative. Anyway, um, yeah. So by rocket to the moon is one I would like to do. And it's remarkable how close its science winds up being to the real deal. So that'll be cool. Also, some Jules Verne, I guess, could probably fit the bill. But for technological, let's see, what's a good example of a historical, older short story that has historical significance? Oh, we could do practically anything out of Asimov's robot series, really, and just kind of the discussion on AI thought processes. There's a couple of those in there that I still maintain are insightful. I mean, if Stanislaw Lem is giving you massive street cred for having insightful views, you're probably pretty out there. I need to read more Stanislaw Lem. Oh my God, Stanislaw Lem is so good. He's great. I'm pretty sure he's dead now. Um, but yeah, by Rocket to the Moon is unfortunately not short, but I could like take breaks to talk about, here's the math and here's what it takes to actually send a rocket to the moon, or what it would take, what say the the Apollo missions took, that sort of thing to get up there. Apollo missions, yes. Anyway, with that, I got a dip. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. That again is not going to be for a hot minute, but you're good, Warren. I had a lot of interruptions from my own end, so here we are. um, Me interrupting myself mostly. But yeah, have a good one. The usual spiel: stay safe, stay sane, stay toasty or cool as per your preference. Stay desiccated or moist as per your preference or better equilibrium, and be decent to each other. Yeah, that's all I got right now. I gotta take a nap. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I got other stuff I gotta get done, but I'll do those things. Alrighty, yeah, no, thanks again. And yeah, later.